All right, good morning, everybody. It is time to get ready for our first session, which I'll be doing. So if you are, wrapping up those conversations and take your laptops or your notebooks out, whatever you prefer taking your notes in, the old way, the analog way, or the tappity tap, whatever it is. So we're going to start in maybe in just 1 minute or two. So.
Do what you got to do. You can always, baby. 'Cause that's what I'm gonna do too. Baby, I thought that it would last and last. Sometimes it comes too fast. Sad when the end it comes too late.
Awesome.
Ashamed to see a good love turn hateful.
So we had a little bit of a change in the schedule, a switcheroo, so we're starting my session a little bit early. And so if you either want to start a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you want to grow your audience engagement on social media, you're either going to be one of two people, right? You're going to yay, social media, connecting to people, or then oh my God, why? So on my session today, I hope that I'm going to help you provide, tools so that you can look at how we can use human behavior and analytics to grow listener engagement on social media. So I'm Xavier. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a second, but I hope that the session just provides that humph that you need to really get in there. So let's talk about a little on the social media use that you have. Who here gets up in the morning, the birds are chirping, and you're let me open Instagram or LinkedIn to check out what my listeners are up to ask them what their favorite episode was, or, what they're up to. Here, am I just we have a shy one. Okay, 3 people, yes, okay. That is about the average people, because normally people are However, who here wakes up in the morning, opens up social media to check up on their friends, on their family members, and even those random people that you met at a bar 2 years ago, and they somehow got dogs and cats, and you know their name and you know what they're up to? More people. There you go. So the first thing that we have to think about is social media is a social tool. And as podcasters, we feel like we're talking all the time on our show, and we kind of use social media more as a broadcast channel than a communication, a conversation, a two-way. So hopefully that was the first bit of advice that we're going to take from here on out, is that we need to be better at treating social media as if it is, we're talking to our friends and family. And one thing that I get all the time, and you may be thinking, is you know who you're serving on your podcast, but you may be struggling to think about who is this person who's following me on social media. And that's very common because we think all the time oh, my listener, but not everyone who is following us on our podcast will follow us on social media, and vice versa. And that is the big mistake that we think, well, if they're listening, why should they follow? And normally, I think about these things that make us all human, right? And I'll delve into those in a second. But just quickly about me, I am Xavier. I'm the founder of the Podcast Space, which is both a company and a podcast. So I serve multilingual minorities and women who want to increase their impact and grow their influence through their podcast. And a lot of my clients are spread across the US and the world. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to be sharing today have been tested not only with a US audience, but a global audience as well. And because I am an extrovert, I kind of take that into as well the social media. So I do make sure that whenever I am treating, my listeners or my social media followers, I treat them as if I met them on the street. And I feel like that is one of the things that helps. There's no persona, because sometimes we feel like we're oh, we have to put up an act, and people connect to authenticity. So even last year, right, the word of the year was authenticity. And that is great for us because it means we don't have to be anyone else. So let's dive into these questions, right? Do people really want to here to follow you, to know what's up with your life on social media. That is one of the biggest things, because we're doing so many things. Like, they listen to the show, that's enough, right? But that's when normally I pull data, because normally data doesn't lie, right? Like, data helps us make unbiased decisions. And so Cumulus Media and Signal Insights and Signal Hill Insights, they did the podcast download, the Spring 2024 report. So basically, these companies talk to listeners all the time, and they tell them, like, okay, you are going to tell us what you want podcasters to do from these things. And they ask them, hey, do you follow your favorite, and this is the key, do you follow your favorite host on social media? And it is mind-boggling that over 50% of people said yes. I don't know about y'all, but in my mind, I kind of knew because I do this, but a lot of people tell me that they were surprised. They thought it was like maybe on the 20%. Anyone here that thought this number was going to be lower or higher? Yeah, lower. So this tells us that we're like, okay, if we are someone's favorite host, they actually are invested. And what I thought was fascinating was looking into which social media people actually follow. And again, we need to make a caveat, because every single niche and different podcasts will have different favorite social media channels for people to follow them on. But I thought it was fascinating that 62% people said, yeah, I follow my favorite host on Instagram. And for the Instagram girlies, we feel like we're like, oh my God, we share so many good things on Instagram, and it feels like nobody is there. But the data tell us that Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook are the three main platforms where people say, if I have a favorite host, I want to know what's up there on these platforms. And I know that a few times we think, like, YouTube, is that a social media platform? So YouTube has a lot of features to build community. So when you're thinking about social media, you have to think about a little outside the box for YouTube, because they have a section where it's like the community tab. So you can poll your audience, you can post a lot of things. So if you have not used that feature, and if you are on YouTube, I highly recommend it, because people really get invested. What I thought was interesting is that TikTok only showed up on the 5th place. So when we're thinking about how TikTok works, TikTok shows you new content. So it's not necessarily like the best way to keep up with people. So it makes sense that Instagram is the main platform. And I know that, for instance, Tracy has a huge community on Facebook. She runs a very engaged Facebook group. And so it is true that people can be on Facebook, even though a lot of times we feel like nobody is engaging. People are. And we're going to talk about the nuances of social media audiences. This is going to be the moment when you realize, oh, that is why I'm expecting, if I have, 2,000, 5,300 people on my Instagram or my Facebook, this is why not everyone is engaging. So that is you with your handy dandy microphone, and these are the people that are around you. So I like connecting social media audiences with groups of friends, because it makes it very obvious. So we have on our group of friends our besties. And our besties, they're not a lot, right? Like our good friends that they know what we're up to, they're always supporting us, they check in on us, are the super fans of our podcast. It doesn't matter what we post, they are there. And these people are not a lot, right? They're like a close-knit, but they are hard fans. And then we go into the occasional friends. The occasional friends are the ones that we only kind of see when we do, for instance, like when we go for yoga, or if we do like running or biking, right? We have those common interests, and those are the occasional listeners. They will pick the content, the episodes based on the topic that we are talking about. So for instance, my podcast, I talk about marketing, I talk about growing listener engagement, and I know that if people are wanting to increase their listener engagement, they may not be as inclined to listen to other episodes, and it's the same on social media. They kind of like what they're like. And we're moving into the friends of friends. These are the friends that we only see with our friends. And those are the people that come to us through our guests, or through maybe a partnership that we did with another podcaster or a company. And so these people come to us, and they're kind of trying to figure out who we are, what they want to follow. Maybe we become their new favorite podcaster, but until then, they're kind of like gonna take a little bit of time to get to know us. And so these are kind of like a little bigger, and their behavior on social media will kind of depend. Some people will only engage when the intersection of what you talked about with your guest or when the guest is there, but that's about it, so that's not a lot. And then we have the acquaintances, right? When we're thinking about our life, we have different jobs, we have different groups of friends, we go through life, and these people kind of like add on to the list. That's the same for the window shoppers, the podcast listeners who follow us. But these people will stay in the shadows and not engage at all until one day we post a photo of maybe the behind the scenes, and it has our dog, or has our cat, or has someone who they know, and they're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so, and then they engage, and you're like, oh. And it's the equivalent of meeting someone at a party, and they go, hey, how's your podcast going? And you're like, I didn't even talk to you in 2 years. They're like, I follow everything you're doing, but they never engage. So there's that perception that every single number we see on our followers, everyone behaves the same. So whenever you're thinking, when you're posting something, and I'm gonna be talking about how to maximize that engagement, but this is the baseline. I want you to not think of 100 followers to all engage the same way, because that helps us stay connected. The second biggest misconception is that when we're looking at engagement on social media, we think only of public engagement, the things we are seeing as like the plays, the likes, the comments, and the reshares. But I want to remind you that there is something called a private engagement. And when you're using social media, and when you see something, they're like, oh my gosh, this, my friend and I are always, laughing about, or this is something that my business bestie and I always talked about, and you send a direct message to that friend with that piece of content, that counts as engagement. So we have to remind ourselves that just because we don't publicly see that, it's not that it's not happening, because we have the likes, the reposts, and all of these things are happening. So if people are engaging, whether that's publicly or privately, of course we want to be engaging publicly, right? But if we see that a lot of the engagement is private, it's still good, right? So it's not that it's like second-class engagement. And so let's talk about what people actually want to engage. And this is very similar to what you already do on your podcast. People on social media only care about these 3 types of engagement: educational content, entertainment, and inspirational content. So you want to be, in terms of like basically the highest engagement, you will get the most when it's entertaining or it's inspirational. People want to learn, sure, but normally they want to get more entertainment out of, because they're on social media, they're scrolling, hey, entertain me, right? So when we're looking the lens of our podcast content, one of the reasons why we're lacking engagement is that we're not thinking through these terms. We're just thinking, hey, I just want you to know that an episode is out. Which leads me to my nemesis. Who here has posted this type of post at some point in their podcast journey? Which I will lift my hand, because sometimes I do, right? So let's break down what this type of post is. So we have new episode is out, check it out. Kind of vague, right? Like not saying much what I'm gonna get out of it. And then it has the image, which is probably the cover art of your episode. If you have a guest, it's gonna have your face and the face of the guest and the name of the episode. Now, what this equals is a nudge. It equals what you are, if you are in an office, you tap your colleague on the shoulder and you go, hey, don't forget that there's a meeting in 10 minutes. And your colleague goes, cool, thank you. They're not supposed to do anything, right? And it's exactly the same thing that we're doing with this type of post. This post is not educational, is not entertaining, and it's not inspirational. So if we're not providing any of these 3 buckets, we're struggling to get engagement, because again, people are like, okay, when I have the time, I will go and listen. And it's fine if we want to remind listeners that a new episode is out, but it's likely to not give us engagement. So what can we do? Before we move forward, I want to just make sure that you may be doing already some of these things, so it's just a good reminder of not to do them. And I want to remind everybody that lazy posts yield lazy reactions. And what I mean by this is that if you are not putting in the work, if you're like, oh, I can't be asked because I'm so tired, I've been editing, or like life got busy. And so when you don't put in the effort of putting a post together that is really good, it's gonna yield lazy reactions, right? Like just, again, the inception of it will have those consequences. And so I'm not saying that you have to create the slickest, most complex post, but it has to have intention. And so understanding that different types of posts will lead to different types of engagement. Some posts will lead toward public engagement, and others, if they touch our heart and we're like, oh my gosh, like I really felt like that and my friend had that moment, that is the type of engagement that it will instill, and that's okay, right? But we just need to be mindful of what are we doing to our listeners, what type of engagement are we provoking? And then not overcomplicating the ask. I see a lot of times podcasters in the same post because you're like, I only gotta have time for one. So you're like, comment and tell me what you thought, and then go and listen, and then like don't forget to share with a friend. A confused user will not do anything. And so that is important to think about, like one ask per post. Basically same thing in your podcast, right? Like your call to action at the end needs to be very specific and directed. So those are just like good things that I like calling. So let's move into the first human behavior that we want to be mindful of, priming. So when we're thinking about priming an audience, is creating an environment that's gonna give us a reaction that we want. And so here, what we have is consistent branding, right? You can recognize my yellow, no better way to recognize a host by their face, right? And then we have just consistent colors throughout. And many, many times people tell me, I knew this was your post because it was your yellow. And so what we want to do by priming the listener is to stop that doom scrolling that we all get into, right? And so when we stop the scroll, we're enhancing our chances of getting more engagement. So if, unfortunately, you've been opening up Canva and you're like choosing whatever colors and whatever template, it may be the reason why you're struggling to get engagement, because people don't recognize that it is your content that is showing up on their feed. So that is why you may be struggling to get engagement. So most basic thing is just stick to your brand colors, stick to, if you can, showing up your face, because humans connect to faces. It's primal. We are wired to recognize faces in a crowded space. So if there's no better way, and that's why video is taking off so much, because people want to see faces, or people are primed to see faces and stop. So faces, consistent branding, and consistent colors if you can. Now the second one is emotional connection. I'm not saying here that you need to make your listeners cry or like to move them, but we need to connect on an emotional level. And what I mean by this is we need to find ways to connect with things that they really care about. So asking ourselves, who are we serving? What do they care about? Is basically the beginning of us tapping into that emotional connection. So this is a post that I did that went viral. And I knew that I would get a post that would go viral if I knew it was going to be a meme. And the reason why I talk about ways to grow your podcast and, podcast advice. And so a lot of the things that I cover are alternative ways to provide insights on podcasting and marketing your podcast so that it inspires people. And I am someone who's funny, I like humor, so I incorporate that into my social media. And that's one of the kind of like ways to position myself in a different light and really distance myself from other podcast experts. And so this post was real. So again, the element that I know that social media channels in general right now are pushing video more than other platforms. And then it was a meme. And I used the Little Mermaid. And this is where primarily my audience is female. So I know that they're going to resonate with Ariel. I mean, last year, all we talked about was the live action, or this year, The Little Mermaid, right? Like it got rebooted. So it was all about people's awareness. And so what did I tap into? I tapped into pop culture, because I know that my audience probably, when they were younger, they watched The Little Mermaid. And so this meme was kind of like, it was actually like a GIF, and it was like she was kind of getting annoyed. And that is exactly the reaction that I get when I tell clients, hey, your podcast is not bringing you clients because one, you're not planning, and two, you're not actually, creating content that is going to instill that behavior, that is going to make your audience see you as the expert that they need to hire. And people go like, oh, okay, I know I'm supposed to do that. So people connected to those two elements. And so when we're looking at the analytics, so when we're looking at nearly 165,000 people played it, and over 2,000 liked it, and again, it depends on your audience. Like some people will have a huge audience and other people have a small, very engaged audience. But this post, for 93 people to save it, like it's big for me. So I was like, oh, okay. And 69 people shared it. Most of these was actually privately shared because I could not see. So I was like, oh, interesting. These really resonated with people in a different way. So I know that memes are something that I can continue doing because people connect to. Of course, ideally not going viral with the wrong audience, but I know that my audience always engages more. I see an increase in engagement whenever I share these. And again, you can make however you want. You don't need to make humor if you don't. The third one is the fear of missing out, the big FOMO. This is probably the one that we know the most, right? And so how do we tap into these fear of missing out? So this human behavior is really easy to tap into when we have teasers and when we have, maybe a reminder of something that happened, like leaving, and you probably saw this, there's a lot of video podcasts that are ending in a very dramatic way. So the way that I've chosen this one, and this is like a video, but I was like, I don't know if this is gonna play, so I might as well just like pick some screenshots. So I know that my audience, podcasters, who here has not been through the process of, I got sick, I had to record, I was struggling with my allergies, and I don't know what to do. I know I have. I recorded many podcast episodes where I was like, I am struggling, but an episode has to come out. So one of my friends, she's a vocal coach, and she's a voiceover artist, and so basically I asked her, hey, can we record a podcast episode about how to record when you're feeling sick, how can you clear your voice, but also how can we avoid getting sick? And so this clip here is basically, it's so rough, y'all. It's so rough. It's like cuts of moments of just sounds, and it's like us clearing our sinuses, like sniffing into the microphone, basically making all these sounds that people tell you not to do, but it's just basically to show like how congested both of us were sick when we were recording. It was so funny. And so she's like making trumpet sounds, and she's basically like showing you how to like release your jaw and all of those things. And so it was really funny. Again, not that like I'm not gonna get an award for the editing of this one, but it really found its way. People were really loving this. And again, it's a different take on a topic. So when you're thinking vocal health, you're not thinking about humor at all. You're thinking like, okay, the exercise, the textbook, and it was a different approach to this topic that I know it's very important. So I challenge everyone to really take an unexpected take on this topic that your audience is expecting from you. So again, it was educational, and what did it do? People were like, fear of missing out. I know I will get sick at some point, let me save it, right? So I knew people would be saving it because like whenever I get sick, I go into my saves on my profile and I'll see it. Or people who are like, oh, this was really funny, let me just put that when I need a laugh. So two different elements, again, the educational and the fun element. So I really challenge everyone to think about like how can we make it more interesting and have fun, honestly, because if you're not having fun, your audience is not having fun. And so last but not least, the path of least resistance. I want to challenge the idea that you need to save your best content for your podcast. We need to stop telling people, just go and listen, just go and listen. It is a high friction item, a high friction request to exit the app, to stop what they're doing, to go and listen, right? Like how many times you're told to do that? I'm like, I'll do it later, right? And so if that's all we're asking, we're not creating engagement in the platforms we're in. And this post was something that I knew my listeners would want. The top podcasting mistakes to avoid in 2024. This post and this episode continue to get plays, and we're like almost at the end of the year. Why? Because people want to know what to focus and what to stop doing, because our time is precious. And so I knew that that was going to be a post that people would be interested in. So something that you may have noticed is that also less is more. A lot of my posts are not very busy, are not like filled with stuff. But something that I always make sure that I do is including my tag, the name of my business, my company, in there. Why? How many times are you scrolling through LinkedIn, through Instagram, and the handle of the person somehow shows up in a video? If you're watching like maybe on the discovery page, or if you're looking at hashtags, and the name of that person, you don't recognize whatever anything else, but you recognize the keywords in their profile. So that makes you either remember them more or to go back and follow the creator. So again, it creates engagement. And so what did I do on this whole presentation? It's like an Easter egg. Every single one of the slides has my handle on it. Why? Because if you're taking photos and if you want to share them with your audience later on, you can find me. They can find me, right? I'm not making you do the work. And when we're thinking about the path of least resistance, we have to think about we need to do the work in order to get the engagement. We shouldn't put the work in our audience. And so let's make sure that tagging, following, those things are always visible somewhere on our post, because sometimes, and one of the easiest ways to grow is to share other people's content. You don't need, again, thinking about the path of least resistance. If you are very busy, stop thinking that you gotta create content, share someone else's post. And that is something that I want you to look into the analytics. When we're looking at the analytics, we need to think about like the high friction, the low friction, even for ourselves. Where are we spending the most time? If we don't know what's working, let's look at the analytics, because platforms want us to succeed. So they will tell us when our audience is live. And that is the first mistake that I see people. They post whenever. But these platforms, Meta, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn actually won't tell you, but most platforms will tell you when your audience is mostly live. So we will increase the engagement by making sure that the most eyeballs possible are live when we post the content. And you can do this exercise. You look into the analytics and you post a similar post when your audience is mostly live and when it isn't. Because the way the algorithms work is you post something, the social media platform pushes it to the audience, and it kind of starts testing. If people are not engaging, then it kind of like deprioritizes that content. So we want to give ourselves the best possible chances of that content being seen so people engage. This is super simple, but honestly, like, we just gotta make sure that, again, we can schedule stuff. And like Meta says, hey, when are my most audience active times? They will tell you. Instagram, they will say, hey, days and hours. TikTok, the same. And so analytics are also different ways to help us if we are looking at formats, right? Do they prefer video? Do they prefer, posts that are just written? Carousels? What is it? So you're gonna look at the last 90 days, because just the past month is not enough. As we know, we just came off the election cycle. It was a mess. So looking at the data there, like, people have very little capacity to engage with a lot of things. So looking at 90 days is gonna give us a very solid capacity to analyze data that is not gonna be corrupted by anything else that may have happened, right? So just quickly looking at the engagement, what do we see here? There's a lot of faces, right, on LinkedIn. I know that what created the most engagement was posts that had multiple people tagged. Again, that's an easy thing to do. It's just the best practices, right? Faces, consistent colors, announcements, and also the colors, right? So if you're listening and someone says, like, video is the only way to go, look at your analytics, because your audience may prefer static posts. And I want you to stick to 3 to 5 templates. I know it's hard, but it's easier to measure what is actually working when we have less. And then we can experiment every now and again, but it is easier to follow the data and see what do they like, what's the format, what were we talking about, and did it have faces? Like, what was this? Was this about a personal topic? Was this about the podcast itself? And I want you to think about content performance in a different light. I want you to go beyond the promo. We're about to hit the end, by the way, so if you have questions, get them ready. So I want you to go beyond the promo and connect on a personal level. We are mini celebrities, and what we think is mundane is really, really interesting for our audience. Sometimes sharing a slightly different angle with the way that we're talking to our audience on our studio is enough. They want to know, instead of just saying, hey, I just had so-and-so, when you're recording, right before you hop on that interview, say, oh my gosh, I'm about to have my dream guest on the show. And I had that happen where I say, hey, I'm gonna have Jay Klaus. I cannot believe I'm gonna have Jay Klaus on the show. And then so many people talked about it, like, oh my God, I love Jay Klaus. I cannot wait for that interview to drop. So we're priming them about the fact there will be a Jay Klaus interview in the near future, right? So they're more committed. It will be in the back of their mind. And they're like, oh, wow, like they are getting their dream person on the show. Maybe I can also invite my dream guests, right? So there's like multiple elements. And then I want you to have more conversations with your listeners. We crave engagement with our listeners, but sometimes we feel like I'm nobody to ask them. But people crave that one-on-one level, and we too. So let's try to start more conversations on the DMs. And then don't blindly follow trends. I see a lot of people just like, oh, I don't know about y'all, I don't like dancing. So when people are like, dance, that's how you're gonna get your people, I'm like, no. Because when you're following the trends blindly, you're blending in, right? And what we want is to stand out. And so I want to invite you, last but not least, to celebrate the milestones, things that feel small, right? Every single time I hit a new milestone on, like, maybe I hit 4,000 unique listeners, or a new milestone in terms of like episode performance, or I had someone who I was like, oh my gosh, I love this creator, I cannot believe I'm having it. People want to celebrate with you, and that will increase your engagement no matter what. And again, also talk about the things that you struggle with, like, let's try to keep it balanced. So that is it for me. What I'm going to say is you can scan this QR code, because I'm going to be re-releasing a social media course for podcasters that talks about the formats that you can use. They're going to have some downloadables. So if you want, you can scan. Also, you'll sign up to my weekly newsletter that is all about practical ways to grow your podcast, to get the visibility you want, and you'll get a 25% discount on the course when that comes out. So if you like some deals, do it. And then connect with me on Instagram. I really showcase a lot of different ways to create content in ways that feel very, very like doable. And you can take that, it's not just like the Instagram way, you can do it for LinkedIn and everything. So that is it from me. Thank you very much for being such an attentive audience. Thank you. Any questions, please? Always like hard to be the first. Awesome, great idea. Any questions? Oh, yes. You can project, perhaps.
So you already mentioned your newsletter, and what are some good, or how do I ask this? What have you found to be a good tactic to convert people to your newsletter, and what growth have you seen from your newsletter versus social, and do you treat it as social? Like, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So the question is, how do I convert people to the newsletter? Which one is best? How can we grow? What is a good growth rate? So this is so simple, but it is so true. The more you talk about it, crazy, the more signups you get. It feels like it's annoying. We're always talking about the same thing, but it truly is. The more you do the thing, the more results you'll get. And it's also true for social media. The more posting you do, high quality, not just like lazy, as we've learned, the more high quality content that we get, the more we'll grow. If we only post once a month, we're never on social media. If we only email one time and we don't, ever reply to our people, we're not gonna grow. So I always assume that the people on my Instagram are not on my email newsletter and do not listen to my podcast. Why? Because there'll be people who are like, Anna, and this is true because I do it, I will look at someone, I'm like, I love what they're doing, but I actually hate their podcast. I may like that bite-sized thing, but maybe they only invite experts, and I'm like, but I like how they're an expert here. I don't care about the other people, right? There may be so many different reasons why people want to connect to us. And so many people join our email list, our social media at different times. I had someone who said, I've been following you for, I'd say probably 2 years. And I know specifically where she came from. And she followed me for 2 years. I launched my podcast, and only 3 months after I launched the podcast, she eventually went to listen because she was like, oh, I really resonated with this topic. So we have to stop assuming that if they are on the newsletter, they don't care for following us. Because again, you will be someone who, email is my thing, I do not care for social media, so you have to treat it as something that is like in itself. And something else that I do on my newsletter is that the format that I have is I talk about the episode, that week's episode, and then I have a section that says a post you may have missed. And so I include a link to a post that I did that week or maybe 2 weeks ago that is connected to that episode to get them to my Instagram. And then I have events and podcast news. And so that is the way that I like, is very symbiotic. I think it's important to make sure, again, when you look at your data, the more you talk about your podcast on social media, the more you'll grow. And I actually asked a few people, peers, this summer was really weird in terms of download numbers and performance. And so I didn't share, I turned my podcast from episodic to seasonal, so I took the summer off. And so I actually continued to promote my podcast and I continued to grow. But my friend was like, actually, me and 2 of my clients stopped promoting the podcast whatsoever. Like, they did not promote the podcast during the summer and they saw a dip in downloads. So even though we feel like they may not be engaging always with the content, it's a good nudge, a good reminder that like, oh, I love their podcast. I have not listened to this week. So just making sure that we're consistently doing. In terms of growth, in terms of newsletter, I see it all over the place. There's people who are like, it depends on the niche. Some people have like the 1% growth month on month. It just depends. I would say the most effective way to grow is partnerships, podcast swaps, newsletter swaps. And so when you have someone who is in your niche, I mean, there's so many podcasters there doing similar shows to you right now. Commit to saying, hey, I'm gonna tell my audience, hey, I just met this person, this is their podcast. Same thing for podcast swaps. We need to tap into each other's audiences. Collaboration is key to a consistent growth. And I had so many people say, oh my gosh, I saw that you were a guest on so-and-so's podcast. Can you be a guest on mine? Or they're like, oh my gosh, I did not know you were doing this thing. You are coming to my life at the right exact time that I need to know about this thing. So we never know what is truly happening. And that was so long-winded. I'm so sorry, but I hope I tapped into like a lot of questions. Yes?
You mentioned the platforms of Apple and Spotify. Are they so lowly ranked or lowly visited?
Well, I'm talking about social media. So the only thing that Spotify just launched, so let me actually recap the question. So you were asking me about the Apple podcast and Spotify and why didn't I talk about it. So Apple does not have like necessarily like a community engagement hub right now. Spotify just released the section to comment on episodes and you can actually reply now. Now, in the US, more and more people are using Spotify, but in Europe, for instance, Spotify is huge, and so people are getting into it, but I would say I like meeting people where they're at. So if you have a highly engaged newsletter, is doubling down on that newsletter, but I always say, you know, companies go bust, acquisitions happen, so always try to make sure that you have 2 channels. They are not ideally bought by the same company. So we all remember when Facebook went down and we were like, like I don't have Instagram, I don't have Facebook, I don't have Messenger, I don't have WhatsApp. And so a lot of people were like, I'm literally locked out. And so a lot of people freaked out and launched newsletters. So I would say 2 channels just to keep yourself safe. And again, do maintenance like Instagram, my favorite platform, LinkedIn, my least favorite child. But I'm still there because there are opportunities that come through LinkedIn. So I'm strategic about picking those. So if I were you, I would look at, is your audience on Spotify? Asking your audience, actually, we were talking about earlier about polling your audience and how it was very useful for them to ask their audience, what would you like in terms of our YouTube content? So asking takes the guessing game out and saves us time. So I would do that, to ask like where they are, where they would like to be engaged, in which platform. Like which platforms you should pick, and then like how do you start engaging with people? Oh. Yes. Yes. I would say the best way to start creating a very strategic content strategy is tapping into your strengths. So if you really like TikTok, do not try to do a LinkedIn just because. So start by doing the things you're naturally good at, that you naturally already have some traction. And so if you're thinking about creating trailers, and there's so many different ways we can tackle this. If we are writers, let's write a lot. If we are someone who likes pictures, likes to take beautiful pictures and engage our audience there, there's so much to be said about building momentum and keeping us accountable, right? You don't want to go, surprise, I have a new podcast, because you're building that from scratch. So it can be really hard. So my advice would be, get people involved as soon as possible. When I launched my podcast after working with podcasters, since many years ago, I launched my podcast in 2008, so technology was different. And so in 2020, I was like, I have all these clients, I want to launch my podcast later. So 2023, launched the podcast after launching my company in 2020. I was like, okay, this is the time. So all these people that followed me for all these years, I was like, all right, I'm launching a podcast. I want you to get involved. Here are 3 thumbnails. Which one do you like? So people, when we launch, they go, oh yeah, you picked my thumbnail, right? The one I voted for. And it may feel like people are not, engaging right away. It takes time. But again, it's trying to build that connection, asking people, what would you like? The trailers, I think definitely trailers are important. You can do a recap of if you pre-record a lot of stuff, you can do it, or you can go ahead and just talk about what the podcast is going to be about. That will be a really good way to build momentum, and asking yourself, what do I want this to be, and how involved do I want my audience to be as well? But I would say social media, at least just one channel. Newsletter, if you can, as complex or as simple as you want. Those are very important things, because you own your audience and you have an uninterrupted access to people's inboxes. There's no algorithms, there's no timelines or whatever. Their email is open. And so just another tip, it is actually very easy to get sponsorships for your podcast if you have a newsletter. I had multiple times. I talked to Circle, I talked to Riverside, and they were like, oh, you have a newsletter, right? And I was like, I do. They're like, all right, let's do this then. Because if I did not have it, they'll be like, actually, we prefer to do podcasts that have email newsletters attached, because it's easier to measure. So that would be my advice.
So when do you experience fatigue with your email list? I mean, what is a good example of if you put that weekly, monthly, daily? When do your viewers tend to experience fatigue and turn you off on an email list?
Yes. So when do people have fatigue about your thing? I think, right. So I would say I do not worry about that. I mean, I do not email weekly. I did a test for about 6 months. I ran a twice a week newsletter. So one, it was like an RSS feed newsletter. So basically, whenever a new episode was out, the newsletter would automatically pull the title, the image, and the copy. And it was like, hands off. And then my Friday newsletter, it has resources, it has all the things. It's I really take a lot of time to build that newsletter. And so I would say that in terms of conversion, people were behaving about the same. They were opening the same, they were clicking the same, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So that was an assumption. So I'd say test to see what they want. But there'll be people that have an interest in your newsletter, and then it will wear off, and then they come back, And I don't care about unsubscribes, but that's why it's important to have that conversation back and forth and ask them, hey, is emailing you once a week too much, right? I would say, I mean, if they want to unsubscribe, they unsubscribe, right? I'd say we want to be relevant, and so it's also your capacity. Can you be consistent? If one email a week feels like too much, go every other week. But whatever keeps you consistent on their inbox is the best way. And just making sure, like, again, asking that conversation, is it too long? Is it too short? And for instance, Jay Klaus, he has a podcast called Creator Science. So he actually runs a lot of experiments on his podcast. And he showed 2 emails he received the same day. One person was like, Jay, my man, your email is too long. Geez, like, I don't have time. And then the other one immediately after was like, Jay, I love how thorough you are. Right? So it just proves that you will have people. And again, that's when, like, let them go. If they don't want, they'll come back. I had people that unsubscribed to my newsletter and then 6 months later resubscribed. So their problem, not mine. So I think I want to write frequently, I do it. So that's how I would say. And again, is this the layout? Are you putting, is it, like, what is it that is not resonating with them? Why are they leaving? That's what I would look into. Oh, yes.
As for newsletters, what software or service do you use?
I use ConvertKit as a newsletter provider. They have a free plan that is pretty cool. They have a free plan that is up to 10,000 subscribers for free and 1 email sequence. So basically, an email sequence is you sign up to someone's newsletter and you receive a bunch of emails. They also have products. So I have courses. I sell the courses through. I have consulting. I do that through there as well. And then if you want to buy, it's $30 a month and you have access to their whole suite. And to be honest, my favorite thing is their creator network. So, and I need to make this caveat, otherwise I feel like I'm not going to be sharing truth here. So last year, I emailed them and I was like, hey guys, I've been using ConvertKit for a while. I saw that you did a post on the best podcasters, like the OGs podcasters. And I'm like, how are you interested in covering perhaps the up and coming? And so I pitched them like this. And so they're like, well, Anna, we're actually shifting some of the things on our content strategy, but we have a discovery platform. We can feature you. So, hey, there I was being featured, and I got, I think, maybe about 100 subscribers out of just being featured for 2 weeks on their, like, highlight thing. So it's almost like a discovery, like, platform. So you basically put in what you like or the keywords you want, and then you follow people. By now, I have about 900 forums recommending me, so that, like, I get like sometimes 70 new subscribers per month, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 50, it depends. But those are the things that make ConvertKit really, really good. MailerLite is another great option for free. So yes, that's what I would recommend. Sorry, I think that she was first. MailerLite? MailerLite, yes.
I was going to recommend that as well.
There you go.
This is more not as much of a question, but going back to social media, if you could talk a little bit about why it's important to be consistent on social media.
Yes. So, excellent question. So we were talking about the ebbs and flows. Trust me, I do not want to be on social media all the time. I just moved to Arkansas. For the past month, I was stressing. We were preparing our house. And what did I do? I decided to bring in the capacity that I could. So it's important to stay top of mind to people. And again, it's not like a scarcity mindset of like, oh, they'll go somewhere. But we always have things that we have going on. So we're working on a client, we're working on a podcast. And so if we can just snag a picture just to be there, to connect to people, because out of sight, out of mind truly is. And with social media algorithms, if we stop showing up on people's feed, they may fill their time with other people. So I would say, if we cannot show up on creating a video or creating a carousel, can we share other people's posts? At some point, I literally spend so much time just sharing. I'm like, okay, Spotify for Podcasters has a new thing. Or like my friend Dylan did a video that I was like covering that. I'm like, awesome, share that. And we continue to build our audience. We cannot be like that one-sided relationship, right? That is like, all right, I'm here, therefore, hi, posting a gazillion things, and then we leave. It's like that friend who just like does not reply to our texts unless they want to hang out. Nobody likes that. So I would say like showing value in any way that we can. And sometimes it's just sharing old stuff. Just like, oh, in case you missed. Oh, my guest had an award. Remember, go and listen to their interview. Those are ways to stay present and making sure that we're not just showing up when we have a new season or whatever. I do not know if I'm supposed to continue. Yes. Yes.
If one has a blog, can that be used as a newsletter?
If a blog can be used as a newsletter, I am gonna put just my guessing hat here. I would say it depends on your niche. Some people still have really big, thriving blogs, and again, do not underestimate SEO. People will always go on Google and search for things, but it's almost like the comment section on blogs is not something that people are engaging a lot anymore. It feels like it's, kind of like there's still a little bit of a wall. I would say starting a newsletter that features some of those articles, right? And going beyond sometimes what we talk on the article, maybe a thought we had or a picture we didn't include, and recycle that content to a fresh audience. Because it feels like once you have content out there, you cannot re-engage, right? And you can't control who's coming. So by having a newsletter, you can promote it in different places. Yes. If the newsletter can be posted on social media, 100%.
So it's maybe like a paragraph or so.
Like a teaser? Yeah. You can definitely a lot of people share those notes on the phone, right? They share pictures of those, and that's how they share. And news articles are shared like that as well, and people still go and check. I would say you can literally do that, but it's kind of like you have to ask yourself, why would anyone choose to do that versus going directly to the blog? I would say I'll give them a reason, like maybe you showing up in a different way to promote that piece of content. And then, maybe it's like 3 pages of that content and something else. I think that is a little bit of a friction if you always want them to go to the blog. But if you're like, you know what, I think this is great, I just want to literally copy and paste, because it's almost like a big tweet, right? You're just screenshotting those elements, and then you're just providing that value on social media. I think that can work for sure. It's like reading an essay on your Instagram or something.
I'm sorry, I actually disagree a little bit with that from a marketing standpoint. And when you are on Instagram, if you have really long text, that it will cut you off sometimes. And so if you put too much in the caption, it will tell you can't add anymore. And so one of the things that I like to look at from just a standpoint in my job, I work in marketing, is you have major touch points. And so you have all these different elements in which you're gonna reach your audience. And some of it is going to come from the newsletter, some of it's gonna come from social media, some of it's gonna come from your blog. And you wanna make sure that if you want to do all of those things, to be consistent and to do them well. And you can, I would say that you could take parts of your blog or parts of your newsletter over to social, but don't put major paragraphs, because no one's gonna read that. They're just not going to, especially on Instagram, they're just not going to read it. So if you put a link in Instagram, the best place, a lot of people will argue this, the link in bio, that it's not as relevant anymore. You're not gonna put a link in your caption. Like if you have a post on Instagram, you're not gonna put a link in that caption because it's not clickable. You could do that on Facebook or some other platforms, but on Instagram, there's often in your bio, you can put a link in your bio. And a lot of Instagram, like content creators and such, will put like a link that takes you to a list of like the different things, and you could have like your blog listed and sign up for your newsletter and that sort of thing. And so there's just all these elements. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to.
No. You're fine. You're providing different.
You have really great content in what you're saying. I think just in fine tuning what you're putting on Instagram and certain platforms, you want to be thinking in those platform formats, and not just like totally copy and paste. So, but I've seen people take YouTube videos and translate all that, all the audio and turn that into blogs, so you see it happening. You just have to be really mindful of like what audience is looking at that, because you're gonna have a different audience that's on Instagram versus a different audience that's on your Facebook versus different audience that even is listening on a consistent basis to your podcast. So that's just my
I agree.
input. But
I agree.
Sorry.
You're fine. I want to tap onto that because I agree with you. It has to be optimized for the platform, right? So if you take screenshots of the text and people are swiping, right? Again, that is more visual. And again, to your point, like people, like sometimes it's really hard to read on the caption itself, but an image, again, it has to make sense for the person who's on that platform. And I will never forget Grant, what's his name? Oh my God, Adam Grant. He's organizational psychologist. And he was talking about when people started sharing their tweets on Instagram, he goes, oh my God, I never thought I could share my tweets here. This makes it so much easier because I hate taking pictures of myself. And funny enough, 6 months later, he's now getting on video. But, that is like finding a way, tuning into what is happening, like what you were saying about like, what does the platform already do well, and try to mimic that for the content that you have. So if you see something like, oh, I want to experiment with that, or I want to maybe share like a script, and then it's something that to your point, ManyChat for Instagram, for instance, people, or manually how I do it, you can go, hey, if you want the whole episode, write the word whatever, and I'll send you the link. So that's an automated way to skip, for instance, the link in bio at the top. If that's too much work for people, it is sometimes too much work for people. But yeah, basically I think that's like a alternative ways. Just see how other people are doing it and see how you can adapt what they're doing to what you like, and that will help. We're good? Okay, if we don't have any more questions, then I'll close my laptop. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.